All right, what is up, everybody? Shadow Scout 0013 here, coming in with another video, this time with Graeme and Pally, and we're going to talk about the Pentagon of Power. Now, I know that in the very beginning, I kind of mentioned that we're going to talk about underused and underrated units, but that doesn't come until about in an hour and 8 minutes into it, and I was going to put some markers in there last time and completely did not mark everything in my notes. Today, I only marked where we started talking about underrated, underused units, and that's about at the 108 mark without the edits. So probably give or take 110 with the intro here. But yeah, guys, if you haven't already, we're going to be doing a giveaway for some dice. They are CIS Baron of dice. All you have to do is be a subscriber and leave a comment. And if you haven't checked out, I want you to know that I am putting up a video, if it's not already up, about the winners of the 3D prints. So congrats to you guys that won that. And if you want to get those STL files, just let me know, and I'll find a way to get them to you. But yeah, go ahead and head to the Discord. Go ahead and start chatting away. This is a really great place to either post your photos of games, talk about different list ideas, get to see fun little lists that Graeme and everybody else put up, and you just get some ideas, run, just your lists and kind of see what the community thinks. And also head on over to the Clan of Shadows Patreon. This kind of helps the channel with giveaways and kind of helps you guys. So you can head on over there. And last but not least, just, yeah, like I said, be a subscriber, leave a comment, and that'll also get you entered in to win. But yeah, all right, hopefully you guys enjoy the video. All right, what is up, everybody? Shadow Scout 0013 here, coming in with Canadian Bear
Yeah.
and Pally.
Howdy.
And today we're going to kind of talk about underrated and underused units, as well as a pentagon of power that Pally has given to us. So yeah, I'll let you take it away, guys, and Pally. I'll let you go ahead.
Awesome. A couple things. So the way I think that this entire conversation got started was Krabak put out an amazing video. Was probably about a week or two back, talking about the power of two. I think it was taking twos of in units and for testing and play purposes and redundancy, and it's an amazing it's a great way to look at list building. And then somebody mentioned it in the Discord there, and I stupidly opened my mouth and went, "Oh, hold on, maybe it's not the only way to look at things," and that spawned a discussion about units and list building and whatnot, and that's how we're here now. So, I don't know if is there any like anything in particular underrated or anything interesting that we want to cover first, or should we launch into identifying unit roles and how to look at things that maybe aren't commonly seen on the battlefield?
I would probably assume going over the latter part first, because then it
Okay.
might be able to explain or kind of give us hints as to what we could see as underrated or underused based off of these multiple roles and stuff like that. Because if we kind of see what does work under a lot of roles, we know what does work, and then maybe we can try and ask what might not work or might be not as used as much.
Gotcha. So let's pull this up here. And then the Pentagon of Power. This is a list building theory that I shamelessly stole from a YouTuber by the name of Tactical Tortoise a couple years back over in the Warhammer 40K community. And he goes over these five roles and how to build a balanced list around them. And I brought this over to Legion a couple years back, and it's worked very well for me. And I think now that we're in Legion 260, it probably works even better than it did before with how the game's changed. So, quick overview: these 5 roles. It's going to seem like a lot of stuff that we're familiar with already, but maybe just a different way of thinking about them. We have range DPS. Super simple. The name is on the tin, right? This is stuff that is capable of shooting your opponent from range. Generally, I like to think about this as anything I put in range DPS is going to be that range 3 plus, but I really like to try to find the range 4, 5, or infinite where I can, because that's where you're trying to apply that long range pressure and shape the battlefield early on, and then apply attrition and force your opponent to hide in places so they can't just be blacked from range and take unnecessary wounds. Um, and again, it's very important that you have some form of long range shooting, because what I found is, especially like if I'm facing an opponent with like a full Wookiee skew or a full Ewok skew or a full Black Sun skew, I can kind of shape the battlefield early on and maneuver when I don't have any threat of being shot from range, essentially, and it gives me a lot of positioning opportunities I wouldn't normally have.
Yeah, I think
I
Graham.
don't know if
I
there's
think
anything you guys want to comment here.
no, I think Graham has a little bit of experience taking only ranged 2 and maybe like a range 3 here and there with the Wookiees.
Yeah. There's no bueno for the most
Yeah.
part.
Yeah, I mean, I don't ever want to say that you can't skew heavily into that range 2 gameplay, but I think it's important to still try to include at least a little bit of longer range fire, just so that you're not left hanging or unable to interact with your opponent early on, and just give them free reign of their half of the board.
So I'm
It's
assuming
probably
that would.
worse now.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, it's probably worse now too with the nerf to recon. They've really hurt a lot of non-arc.
Yeah.
Units.
No, absolutely. Incidentally, I think the nerf to recon probably really helped units like the E-Web, which are kind of one of my premier examples of one of these range DPS units, right? It's not taken very often, especially now, but the ability to start on the battlefield in position while on its face is bad because your opponent can react around it. It provides such a wide field of view, and I guess the FD cans in the same way. They provide such range and ability to shape the flow of the battlefield that even if you're not doing immediate damage, that range DPS potential is forcing your opponent into avenues that they necessarily wouldn't have had, that they would have had open earlier. They can't take now. So,
So do you?
um,
And I'm assuming snipers also are going to fall into this, or do you want something that's a little bit?
absolutely.
Okay, I was going to
Now,
say maybe something that could be more durable. Wasn't sure if that was a part of it or not.
so I think it's important to take a moment and pause here and say that a unit can fit in multiple roles, right? So the next roll up on the list here is going to be aggro and disruption. But I think a sniper, it sits both in a ranged DPS and the disruption half of this next category, because they're not going to put out a lot of damage, but they can put out consistent damage. And with the range on them, you're really forcing your opponent to be mindful of positioning, line of sight blocking terrain, their avenues of movement, thinking several steps ahead. And there's this theory that I have around mental bandwidth. And you only have so much mental bandwidth. All of us have a different amount of it. But the more things I can force my opponent to think about, the more opportunities there are for them to slip up and crack and leave me a crack in their defenses to exploit.
Now,
So,
do you think
go ahead.
that then? Do you think that there's a certain percentage per se, or a certain amount of units that should be kind of long range compared to not long range, or uh,
Um,
si-
I think it's very list dependent. It's I hesitate to say that you should take. We'll say there's 5 bullets here, right? I'm hesitant to say you should take 20% of your list as range because that leads you into perhaps bad practices. If if I'm Graham here and I want to play like a really heavy Wookiee skew list that gets up in your face, I don't want 20% of my list to be range DPS. But what I do want is to make sure I have the ability to shoot at range. So maybe some extra bowcasters to put shots through as I'm running up. Maybe what I want is the fluttercraft with the tail gun because again they're not shooting at range 4, but you're in that range 3 space, and they'll fit into that aggro space and disruption. So now they're in like the fluttercraft and the tailgun are in 2 categories: range DPS and also aggro disruption. They get in there, they force your opponent to move, they dig things out, and their dice pools aren't huge, but they're consistent and they're putting damage through.
Yep.
So it helps shape the battlefield.
So range troopers, I feel like Empire has a little bit more
Yeah.
options on
I
this.
think absolutely. I think right now Empire probably has the most. Empire has like the broadest category of available options. Rebels and Republic have a bit more specialized options, and then Androids, I guess, have some specialized options too. Yeah, it's really everybody has a couple choices, and then Empire has like a broad selection, and then they really get to start cherry picking what they want their range DPS to do. They want their range troopers to be like super long range 5 flankers. Do they want the suppression gun? And they're a bit tankier. Do you want the sniper spam because their snipers are cheaper than Republics, right? So and then again, the E-Web is just beautiful. And their shore troopers now with long shot is really good. They start on the board in a position and they just shut down lanes of travel, or at least make you pay for taking those lanes of travel. So it's your range DPS isn't gonna win the fight, but it's gonna like I said, it's gonna shape the battlefield, preventing your opponent from having free range of their half of the board, and then you're gonna be providing consistent attrition throughout the game, softening up targets, finishing off targets, that sort of thing. So there's absolutely like say a difference between range troopers and a strike team in how they function on the table, but they both fit in that range DPS category.
Yeah.
So,
And then
so
with
that's what I have
so with aggro and disruption, would
there.
the disruption also kind of go with suppression bombs?
Yeah, absolutely. Aggro and disruption being the next category that I look at. Um, they're both 2 different things, and they also I find some a lot of times tend to fit together. If you don't have access to a lot of aggressive in your face units, disruption absolutely would take the place of like suppression bombs. Maybe like a plethora of ranged pierce that you can focus down on a target or two to really start hemorrhaging or models off of that unit, or bullying them back into cover so they can't pop out. Disruption, I also look at like force push, force push as disruption. Probably one of the most iconic pieces of disruption there is. Um, on the front half of this, though, when we get to aggro, we're looking at units that get in your opponent's face on their side of the board on their objectives to really hamper what they're trying to do and potentially even delete stuff. One of the most iconic pieces of aggro right now would be the ARC Trooper. Hence the recent nerf on it, right? It zooms across the board, gets into your opponent's line, and just starts smacking stuff and causes a real problem for your opponent to have to deal with. If you wanted to pop a couple more points and add some disruption to the ARC Troopers, Comms Jammers is one of my all-time favorites. Um,
And what
I'm
about
still of the opinion. Hmm? Go ahead.
what about like the hacked comms unit to be able to get them
Um,
maybe some sort of an order?
so hacked comms, I think it doesn't fit disruption. It definitely fits more in like order control, which is important overall. And I think it depends on what you're trying to do as a whole. Um, Hacked comms on an arc, I could see that argument because you want order control on that arc, so that you can rush it in there early in the game. Probably like do like a classic last burst, get it in there, do a bunch of damage, play a one pip, get an order off the hacked comms, and then go with that arc again before it gets neutered, and really either finish something off or tear into a different unit. The It's not really a problem. The hiccup I have with hacked comms is it starts to feel worse when your opponent has cunning. Like I feel like you're banking on hacked comms to either provide order control in your bag, which depending on the army you're playing is either totally achievable or kind of like, not gonna happen, right? Or um, it's because you really need the unit with hacked comms to go early on a one pip, and it is an aggressive unit like Arcs. Um, I don't hate the hacked comms play on like a dewback. I think that could be spicy. I'm a fan of jammer dewbacks, but I also like the idea of like hacked comms dewbacks, especially if you're bringing aggressive tactics on your commander, because now those
Okay.
dewbacks are going to get in. They're going to be getting orders, and then they're going to be getting surges, and they're going to be that much harder to displace given the red saves and the armor that they have.
That was the arc build that I've talked about before. I kind of use the idea of hacked comms as kind of a bit of a disruption idea too, especially with no longer being limited to range 3 for giving out orders.
Right.
And pairing that up with the uh, captain getting the defend 1, outmaneuver, and then having um, into the fray on them. So when something else activates, they now have a surge. uh, it it works decently, and the one game that I've had testing it out, it actually did work pretty decently for the disruption. As far as like, okay, where can I put my orders so that so he doesn't get it to work on his arc troopers.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I do like that a lot. Like I said,
Now,
I
would you
like what
can
you're saying, and I tend to agree with you there. Absolutely. It's when you hacked comms is something that you build, and maybe this is the takeaway, right? Hacked comms, I'm building around it on a unit with the captain, and then with the situational awareness, like you said, for outmaneuver. I like that play a lot, but it's also more of a points investment. I think there maybe is a world here where you looked at hacked comms like this is a unit that I'm going to build out and really put in there to do some damage and stick around. Whereas comms jammer is on more of like a throwaway unit. Like one of my all-time favorites is a comms jammer B1 that I just hide behind all the line of sight blocking terrain and causes an absolute nightmare.
Fair enough. I will say too, the plan, while it worked, also it was against Nick, who was doing another rebel list. So that's already it's
Oh,
mostly cards that don't hand out orders
no,
anyways.
I mean, there's that.
So yeah, didn't get full effectiveness, but it did at least on like some of the cards that had the desired effect, whether I got the dodge with the captain or not, and um, just making him spread out where to put his orders.
Well, it puts it doesn't really disrupt what your opponent is doing, but what it does is it gives them an interesting dilemma of, hey, there's this unit over here that I really want an order on, but if I give this unit an order, this ARC trooper is going to hurt me.
Yeah, make
But
them ask the questions, make it simple for
absolutely,
yourself. Yep.
and then you come back into you're taking up that mental bandwidth that your opponent has.
now would you consider the Mando commandos and or Republic commandos to be aggro disruption because of either the Mandos having speed 3 and being able to get in pretty quickly, but there's only 4 of them, and the Republic commandos can infiltrate and then maybe kind of move in and get a little bit closer faster. I don't know if you would consider those kind of aggressive
Yeah.
and or because I know that with me, I kind of want to keep the Mandos from dying so quickly because there's only 4 of them, and with the amount of dice pools that are like 8 and higher, it kind of makes it a little bit tougher to make that decision to get them in so quickly.
Yeah. I absolutely would consider both of those aggro and disruption. And there's a couple reasons for this. One, they both can get to your opponent's side of the table without much issue, which is kind of what you want this role to be doing. I also will throw speeder bikes in here. So swoops, speeders, the staps, the bark. I like to throw this in here because they can get from your side of the table to the other side of the table. We traditionally think about aggro, like I said, we've been talking about arcs here for a minute, about getting in and hitting hard with that massive punch. But sometimes getting around to your opponent's backline on a flank and just looking at a commander that's not a glow stick and saying, "Hey, buddy, you're in danger," is enough to cause the disruption that you're looking for and push units out of positions that they wanted to be in. So Mando's only being 4 health. Yeah, they're squishy, or the Rebel Mandos, and I guess the Shadow Collective Mandos to the same degree. They're squishy at 4 health, but with piloting through terrain and issuing orders correctly and maneuvering them around, you don't need them to be there the whole game. You just need them to be there at the right point in the game.
Okay.
So, and then as for Republic Commandos, yeah, absolutely. They infiltrate in. They have a nasty range 2 gun. They can get to your opponent's side of the table. They fit that aggro disruption fantastically. Um, they have suppressive, which is great for disruption. They have scatter, which is great for disruption. And they have a range 4 gun, so they fit into the range DPS category fairly nicely. And this is an example of a unit that I like Republic Commanders, I would put in 2 different categories because they do 2 different things for me. And I find when I'm building lists, I like to find units with overlapping categories so that I recognize my stuff is going to die. So the more things I have that fit, maybe it's not like the best range DPS and it's not the best aggro unit, but it fits into both and it can flex between either role as needed in the battle.
Okay.
So no, absolutely, I consider the Mandalorians and Republic Commandos as aggro disruption.
Now, what about the tanks? Oh, wait, sorry. Go ahead, Graeme.
No, you're good. No, you're fine.
As far as like aggro disruption, do you also consider like a cheap unit like an Ewok Slinger? Is just like running in there. It's like, hey, I got 6 black dice. You're
Yeah,
gonna have to deal with
absolutely.
me. I'm gonna pepper you in the back.
I mean, that's the entire point of this category, right? It's you are putting pressure on your opponent. And this is where you start to get layers of the fight, right? Your range DPS doesn't let your opponent sit on their half of the board and just do whatever they want. It forces them to play the game, and you're causing them to pay a cost for maneuvering where they want to go. Aggro disruption, like the Ewok Slingers, is getting in there and putting a different kind of pressure on them so that they can't just sit back and plink at you with their range DPS comfortably. You're forcing them to maneuver around your range DPS and to counter your aggro and disruption units. 6 Ewok Slinger models are going to blow over like tissue paper in the wind, but you have to deal with them because if you don't, they're going to make you sad. Like,
And when you do deal with them, you'll feel sad because they're only 35 points.
absolutely. Absolutely. You're forcing your opponent to trade down, and that never feels good. And it's one of the best, it's probably one of the strongest things you can do is putting a unit in front of your opponent that's like, hey, this is a bad trade for you, but if you don't trade with it, it's still gonna be a bad trade for you. Like Ewok slingers, dewbacks, tauntauns are more expensive, but I throw them in here also. Anything like I said, anything that gets over to your opponent's side of the board and just makes stuff miserable. Um, Now, I'll probably take a moment here. I'm talking about making things miserable and rough for your opponent, right? We're doing this in the spirit of a good game. We're having fun, we're laughing, we're joking. Make sure while you're making your opponent's model sad, you're telling terrible dad jokes to make your opponent happy. All right?
Always.
That way they're
It's a,
upset, but they don't know why.
right. It's a good count, like a good balancing act.
Oh,
Pour some sugar
absolutely.
into the wound.
Oh, yeah. Just like good list building, it's important to have gamemanship along with aggravating little models that aren't worth any points.
Yeah,
So,
that's a lot
um,
of B1s and a lot of rebels.
no, absolutely. The next category I have on the list here, unless you guys have some more for aggro and disruption.
No, I'm done.
Um,
No?
this is the simplest category out of all five. The tank. It doesn't have to literally be a tank, but there are a few problems that can't be solved by putting a saber tank on objective and telling your opponent to just deal with it. Um, this is a unit that is hopefully, and emphasis on hopefully because your opponent does have a say in this. This is a unit or sometimes two that you're putting out on objectives, and their entire point in life is to just exist there and not die. You're looking at your saber tank, you're looking at your gav, your lat, basically anything in a heavy slot. Um, I like to put ATRTs in this category. I think ATRTs, especially your public ones, fit relatively nicely in both the tank role and the range DPS role. I think most tanks fit nicely in the range DPS role, right?
Hmm.
You put them on an objective and they just sit there and they're hard to get rid of. And kind of the same as like the aggro disruption, where you're putting undercosted units sometimes, like with the Ewoks, into your opponent's line to have to deal with. When it comes to the tank, it feels bad sometimes to shoot into them because they're just gonna shirk your shots or they're just gonna like save out of your wounds. Um, with medic support, it's kind of a little counterintuitive, but sometimes I think you can put Mandalorians in the tank slot. It requires some play around regarding line of sight blocking and medic backup, but it can be done. Um, Maybe the most iconic view of a tank that I could think of that's not a heavy would be a brick of B2s, or traditionally death troopers. So death troopers can be killed with Pierce, but you have to put a lot of Pierce into them, and they're going to probably save out of most of your other fire that's coming in. And I mean, a brick of B2s with what is this, like 16 red save wounds, I think?
Hmm.
They're just a nightmare to deal with. So,
You could probably also put any force user that's using force push on that category too. Then
absolutely. I think with the force user, you have to play a little differently around it. It's I would like asterisk tank a force user, and I'd say
yeah,
maybe like a melee tank. Because if you get a force user into melee, the odds of killing them has diminished significantly. Versus a force user standing on the open, I mean, you just blast into oblivion. Like if I see your Jedi out able to be shot, I'm going to shoot at it. It's that
Hmm.
important of a target. But yes, absolutely. With the asterisk of like in melee, a force user that is stuck in melee that is bubble wrapped itself is an absolute nightmare to try to get rid of, and it's going to sit there and it's going to contest your point, and it's going to kill your stuff. And it is like the force user is probably the most quintessential, like fills every category on the Pentagon of power, except maybe range DPS. Um, there are arguments for Anakin saber throw or Palpatine. Oh no, Palpatine's only range 2. But yeah, right? Like a Force user, it's aggro, it's disruption. In melee, it's a tank. Later on, we'll talk about counterpunch and utility, and it fits both of those as well. But you're paying a premium in points for it. So, but
Do you
absolutely,
think
the
that?
tank being. Go ahead. Go ahead. What's up?
Yeah, sorry. Do you think that almost any red save unit that has the extra squad would be considered a tank?
Uh, potentially.
I see Shores
Potentially.
being that.
I think it's.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think of
I think you
other.
can absolutely make an argument for it. And it's an interesting thought experiment that you presented, right? Because I put the B2s before as a tank unit because they are. You see a brick of B2s, and at least my first thought is, well, I'm probably not going to be killing that unit this game. I might hurt it a lot, but I don't know that I'm going to kill it. Especially if there's a second one.
I'm sure Bad
Um,
Batch could be a good tank.
Bad Batch is an interesting tank. I think with a tank, you really want some defensive tech outside of just saves behind it.
Okay.
I think B2s may be the exception because there's just so many wounds. Right. Trying to like so what is it? It's a squatted clone infantry is 9 before anything else, before heavy or anything else. A squatted B2 is 10. Am I doing that math? No, it's how many is it?
Squad.
It's 3 models, and then the squad is what, 4 more?
Yeah, 4 more, so it's 8 models altogether.
When you get a
If you
heavy,
put a
yeah.
heavy, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, 14 wounds. A squatted B2 is 14 wounds, and that's a size that's basically more than 50% over a squatted clone or a squatted shore before counting the heavy or any or the personnel's taken up. But right, so I think it's defensive tech is important here. It seems a little silly, but a unit like a squatted unit of rebels, like rebel troopers, with access to extra dodges on top of their nimble and maybe being suppressed so that they get the extra cover. It's not like an ideal or an on its face tank, but yeah, a squad. I could even see a squatted unit of rebels with some dodge support and maybe some external support just being incredibly hard to shift.
Maybe
And
10,
similar to
11,
disruption,
12.
right? You're gonna put more points into shifting that unit than the unit's actually worth. So,
Okay.
your tank unit will probably end up dying unless it's just like sitting behind armor 5. But its entire point is to sit on an objective and just hold that objective.
Okay. So pretty stationary.
So
I would assume that maybe like it has to be one unit and not doubled up. So like if you had two E-webs on one spot, it would is that tanking a spot or is that you just looking for a unit that's specifically kind of like a tank? Because I know it says
I
units
tend to
that can
look
sit
for
on.
yeah, I tend to look for like a unit that can sit as a tank. I think an E-web it's only 4 wounds. I think it's only 4 wounds. It didn't go to 5, did it? I think it's only 4.
No, it's still
I
4.
could be wrong.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think an E-web is when you put like when you're putting 2 of them on a point, you don't really have a tank as much as you have a built just like a buildup of mass essentially. You're just putting a critical mass of things on a point.
Then
Kind of in this
would
like it's like the inverse of what you'd be doing with aggro units on an opponent's point. where you're trying to take multiple of your aggro units and put them on your opponent's side. Putting multiple E-webs on your side is just building a critical mass of range DPS on a point.
Well, do you think then that droidicas are either like mostly disruptors and or tanks? Because they'll have 4 shields and 2, and each one it'll still be 6 health, but 4 shields. And with the shield, can you regenerate those shields, right?
Yeah, you can regenerate
Yeah.
one turn. I can see an argument where a Droideka sits in both disruption and a tank.
Okay.
I think I would actually place a Droideka more in disruption and utility, which we'll get to later. But they can sub out as a tank, right? Like you could be in a situation where your list you just don't have the points for a proper tanky unit like a Beef 2 squad or an AAT or a Saber or a Lat or a Gap, right? But with like an off I would consider a Droideka like an off tank type situation.
And now that
Because they
we've got
are
No, go ahead. Sorry.
well
Because they're what?
they are they're hard to displace. Like you have to absolutely focus them down to get rid of them. And the whole time you're doing it, they're making you sad because they're gonna be suppressing you. They have immune deflect, which is not nothing. I believe immune deflect turns off the surge to block now, doesn't it? Or is it only get rid of the deflect half of that?
It's just the ignore the wounds, unfortunately.
Okay, so they still get their surge to block. Either way, not taking wounds back is winning.
Mm-hmm.
But and then with the shields, right? Absolutely. I consider them an off tank.
Now with the new unit coming out, the crab droid with 5 health, red saves. Do you think?
I love this unit.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a really good one. I didn't know if you would what you
crab
might
droid.
consider. Wasn't sure what you might
Talk about
consider
this
it
guy
as.
for a minute. So first off, crab droid, 5 health, 2 armor, red saves. This is basically a Republic ATRT. I've already said I put them in the tank role, and that's because I do. You're gonna have to put a lot into an ATRT, more than you normally would, to get rid of it. And the crab droid's the same way. Second, that crab droid with the impact and pierce melee and its ability to scoot across the board with scout, I would actually stick that in aggro and disruption. It has the ability to get in there, and it'll depend on how you use it, right? Just because something is aggro or disruption in that category doesn't mean you have to use it that way. But it has the ability to get across the board into your opponent's line and just start causing havoc. And not only can it like get into melee and start piercing things off, but you're not actually engaging them. So your opponent has the ability to shoot with that unit, but that unit that you're mailing with the crab can also be shot. And actually, as long as you're in base with the unit with the crab, I believe, as long as you're considering a melee, they can't actually shoot the crab unless they pull out of melee, which is a normal move. So they'll get their attack, and it's not a withdraw, but they can't shoot the crab itself unless they're not touching it. Unless that rule has changed somewhere, but I want to say that's still the way it is.
About the ground vehicle?
Absolutely.
Like, so since it's a ground vehicle, you're not engaged technically, right? So then.
Well, that's what I'm saying, right? So, like, normally if it was a trooper, you'd have to withdraw off of
Mm-hmm.
it. So, like, say I take my crab and I base my opponent's unit leader, a trooper unit, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are now in melee. We can punch each other in the face, but we're not engaged. So, because
Right.
we're in melee, I don't believe they can shoot the crab, but he could pull back and then shoot the crab because it's not a withdrawal because we're not engaged.
Right. Yeah, it's it was a little bit clearer before they changed how the range spans are written down.
Yeah.
But yeah, it should still be that way.
Yeah. So I think crab one tank absolutely. Aggro disruption absolutely. Slap the gun on it. Range DPS. I'll give it that roll. It can get across the board shooting as it goes. Absolutely. It has scouting party on it. I slap that thing in utility straight away. If you have scouting party on you, I stick you in the utility slot. Like the Crab Droid is a very well-rounded unit that covers a lot of bases, and I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I'm liking Comms Jammer on that thing right now. Just trying to,
Com- yeah,
especially if it's going to get
Comp Jammer
into,
Crab Droid is hilarious.
yeah, I mean, if it's going to get into melee with Impact 2 Pierce 1, and it's going to have a Scout 1 already, and it's going to be a pretty big base with Speed 2, I have no doubt that you're going to be in range 1 of something, at least by turn 2 for sure. So,
Crab Droid has programmed, right?
Yes.
yes.
Cool. So defensive protocols and exemplar dodges. Let's go.
Yeah, I didn't even think.
That Crab Droid now has nimble and outmaneuver.
Yeah, that'd actually be pretty good. I wasn't sure if engagement protocols to save. I wasn't sure if engagement to save, points would be better because that's attack move. But I guess I think
Oh
having
no.
the
Oh no. So with AI not really mattering anymore, if you can get dodges to that crab with exemplar, absolutely run it across the board. It now has armor 2, red saves, outmaneuver, nimble, access to dodges, it's piercing on the punch, and it's just a nightmare to deal with. Absolutely. I am here for it.
And if you just bring the generic super attack, now you have range 5 on your AI override.
Yeah, like absolutely. And with exemplar being range 2, like yeah, you just run your dodgy crab in there and don't care. Because however much your opponent puts into killing that thing, it was not worth it in the trade.
Mhm.
Let's see. Yeah, no, I love it. Hmm.
All right, and
Let's see.
then
So, anything else for tank?
I don't think so. I was trying to see if there might be anything because I was looking in the different factions. I mean, I guess the bus would be a pretty good way with the shields. I think that would
You
be
know,
okay.
Yes.
we can take a moment here, and I would put the airspeeder, the T-47, in the tank role.
Why?
Um, so armor 3 is not as bad as people think it is. On top of that, it has cover 1 built in. If you take the pilot for cover on top of that, you have heavy cover. Your opponent needs 4 hits to get over the armor. Statistically, on 4 hits, you're gonna cancel one with cover, so now your opponent needing 5. And every single hit that you add that your opponent has to add to get over the armor 3, your odds of canceling it with cover goes up. Granted, we're still in dice, odds be what they are. My white dice hate me. It's fine. But, you know, it's armor 3, no weak point, with built-in cover and the ability to up it to heavy cover. I fit this thing in the tank role. Now, it's speed 3, gets across the board, aggro and disruption the whole way. Gets in your opponent's line, shoots things that they don't want shot, and does it with a fairly big, consistent gun.
Yeah,
Um,
but I don't know if keeping it in a tank role would be best because if it's going to sit on an objective, it's not either going to be your best aggro or the compulse move might make it a little bit tougher in some instances. So I wasn't sure if you think it would still
well,
be.
sure, but maybe it doesn't have to sit on the same objective.
Yeah.
Being able to bounce from, like, what is it, intercept transmissions, where there's 4 objectives kind of in a diamond. Being able to
Mhm.
bounce from one on the side to your opponent's back line to the one on the other side each round and take punishment while doing it, shooting out the front with the main gun, shooting out the back with the tail gun, maybe throw comms jammers on there for disruption. Like, it's one of those units that your opponent is going to have to deal with. but it has enough defensive tech built in that it's going to be a problem to deal with if they didn't bring dedicated anti-tank.
Okay. I think
Yeah, especially if you put one of the tokens on it. As for in that case
Yeah,
specifically, yeah.
like I think the airspeeder is probably one I can see an argument for hacked comms on if you're going to be playing it more aggressively, or jammer if you're going to be playing more aggressively. If you're going to be playing it more defensively, kind of skirting the mid line to the flank, you probably leave the comm slot empty. But I like the airspeeder. I would sit the airspeeder in the tank slot just because of how much punishment your opponent's going to have to put into it to pull it off the board, and its ability to again because the speeder can't really sit on the same objective, but it can tap or bunny hop from one objective to the next, and just cause disruption and contest points as it goes.
okay. And I think next up you had Counterpunch.
Yeah, counterpunch. Glow sticks. Cool. Moving on. No. Counterpunch is basically what you take in a list to counter the aggression and disruption units your opponent has. So, most people that I've seen still bringing Arcs and Anakin. What are you bringing in your list to deal with Arcs and Anakin? Usually more Arcs than Anakin, right? They are both aggro, disruption, and counterpunch. Myself, I think my all-time favorite counterpunch unit is Captain Rex. Um, because he turns my entire list into one big counterpunch.
I'm assuming with his one pip.
Oh, absolutely. Um, Comey Captain, still, I've said it before, probably not the strongest command card in the game, but it definitely got a buff in 260. Um, but let's see what else counterpunch. Wookiees, I can see as counterpunch. They're both aggro disruption, but if you're not playing the Wookiee list, but you bring a unit of Wookiees, it's a lot of points, but it's kind of good to have either to run into your opponent's line as a kind of off tank unit because they're gonna take a lot of wounds. They will take the wounds quickly, but it takes a lot to actually bring them down at a minimum of nine wounds, right? So they can
Yeah.
get in there, they can be disruptive. You can hold them back. They can counterpunch. I think one of my other favorite counterpunch units is the Fleet Trooper. They have charge
Yeah.
now. Yeah, they have charge now, so I've seen them play more aggressively. However,
They they have
a a bind. Hmm?
they only have like two white dice, and I mean, I don't know. Even if you're rolling a million white dice, you're still probably gonna get like two crits, and or two hits or
So
two something.
here's my argument for that. How many times has your really impressive shiny stuff been killed by B1s?
I mean, not
You don't
too
need to tell
often.
me.
Wow. Well, we must be doing something different. Because my stuff dies to B1s all the time. Of course, I see them in absolute hordes. I think part of why I originally put fleets in counterpunch is because I used to run them in like an incredibly crazy rebel armor list that I had, and I would run fleets with the repair droid and binocs, and their entire point was to just support the armor. However, if a glow stick came in, or Wookiees came in, or some other unit that didn't go straight for the fleets, they get in there, they tie up whatever that unit is, and eight white dice that does surge will do something. Now that we have access to aims with Exemplar, I again for 40 points, I think it's probably slept on a little bit. Not as like the plan, but maybe as a one of to keep back, do backline objective things, play support, and then like play home defense as a counterpunch.
Honestly, you could probably also start throwing Naked Core in there as just like a throwaway unit. It's like, oh, something's coming at me. Toss them
Oh,
so you can't.
absolutely.
I mean, that's
Absolutely.
Nick did that to me the other night.
Like if you have to take 3 naked core and you don't like, and you just only take a naked core, I mean, try taking 2 rebels and 1 fleet, especially now that they have charge. Like it's not. I look at it the same way as I look at like the Ewok slingers. Sure, the slingers are going to be maybe more consistent on their 6 black dice than the fleets on their 8 white. But the 8 white surge, I have charge, and my saves are a little better.
Yeah,
Plus,
but
they can
I'm
take utility items.
yeah, for core units, I think that the Ewoks are going to be pretty decent because I guess you can't even put the squad on there to make it even better. Plus another trapper or plus a trapper and a heavy, so you're going to have a
Well,
pretty decent amount of bodies on that. And
yeah.
then Magna's IRG. I think even the B2 Horde could be a very huge counterpunch because they're
Oh,
going to be
absolutely.
2 black dice each, and then
What you're probably going to find is that a lot of your aggro units also fill in as counterpunch units, and how they how they act throughout the game is going to be dependent on what your opponent is trying to do.
And then would you also keep
So,
maybe some Black Suns in the back, or do you get really aggressive with kind of Black Suns, especially? I mean, 12 black dice, maybe 13. Well, not 12 black dice, but 12 dice or 13 dice is going to probably slap at range 2. I don't know if you would
yeah.
think that they would be better as a counterpunch or more aggressive, but I guess it obviously depends on what's going on.
I think I think it depends on list composition, and what you're trying to do. Again, it's so a lot of these you're not going to have a clear answer, and we're back to units can fill multiple roles, right? If my opponent is bringing a whole bunch of ranged DPS and not a lot of aggro, I'm going to use my Black Sun as an aggro disruption unit. If my opponent is bringing a whole bunch of Wookiees, I might look at how they're deploying. Are they deploying super aggressively to run into my line? I'm probably going to try to counterpunch with my Black Sun. And like keep them just out of charge range and then run them in to blap at range 2. Is my opponent playing kind of mid-rangey with a well-balanced list? Well, on if I have like say 2 units of Black Sun, on one side of the table I could have a unit that's trying to run across the table where they don't have a whole lot of counterpunch units themselves to play aggro. On the other side of the table, if they have a Jedi coming in, I might hold my Black Sun as counterpunch to punish that Jedi for coming in on my side of the board. So there's kind of like a flex unit there that can fill multiple roles.
Okay.
So it's again, I think counterpunch and tank are probably those are probably like the two outside of an actual heavy or an actual tank or beef 2 squad. Those are probably the 2 categories where I'm looking not at like a dedicated unit, but more at a unit like, hey, I have this ranged DPS that can also fill as counterpunch, right? Like in a pinch, Republic commandos can fill as counterpunch. Is it what you want to be doing with them? No. Can they do it? Absolutely. I think you've done it to me with your when we discovered that you can in fact infiltrate onto Arc in your own deployment zone.
Well, yeah,
Your Republic commandos absolutely were counterpunch there.
and you wouldn't ever think that because there shouldn't be an opponent in your deployment zone round 1 when you're still trying to deploy units unless you have a lat and then arcs that disembarked and then double move into your deployment zone.
Right. But again, that speaks to part of this whole theory that I have on list building, right? Who is going to think that I'm going to have a unit of arcs killing your stuff in your deployment zone round 1? That is like the definition of aggro and disruption. because that one act right there, sure, and it spawned the counterpunch with Republic Commandos, right? But that one, getting those arcs that deep in there, kind of shaped that entire battle on that side. And I don't know about from your side of the table, but that felt like I was absolutely doing the disruption thing over there.
Oh yeah, because it was kind of tough to make sure that I'm playing the objective whenever I've got a huge squad of into the fray arcs that are about to keep me from moving anywhere.
Right. And that's in round one. Like that is the primo definition of disruption. But without necessarily having thought about building counterpunch into your list, maybe you had it available to you. And this is kind of what I'm talking about, like tank and counterpunch. I don't they're kind of they're a role that I may not necessarily build around, but I try to make sure I have some that can fill that role.
Yeah, and I think I try to, if I'm going to play something super competitive, I'm trying to usually bring units that have more than one dice in their attack for everything, just in case any of these kind of things come up,
Mm-hmm.
because it's super helpful for any role.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And then
Um,
last up, I think
anything
you've
else
got
here?
no. I think
Okay.
utility and support. Unless Graham, you've got something.
No, I think you guys kind of nailed it with that section.
All right. So utility and support. I think in the current iteration of Legion, this gets overlooked a lot. Maybe there's some subconscious thinking about it, but there seems to be a general community focus on grab the points, kill the stuff, right? And utility is incredibly important. Now, what we do see is utility in the form of long range objective holders. Again, my ATRTs. I run them with laser cannons myself, so I put them in the utility category because they hold my back line. Also, they're line of sight blockers, and I think that that is being able to block line of sight with a vehicle is something that is not printed on the unit card. That is probably one of the most important things that a unit can do. So, your tanks will also do this, and I find that your vehicle tanks tend to kind of accidentally fall into utility because they're line of sight blockers. Um, what else do we have here? Yeah, backline objective holders, line of sight blocker. So, heal and repair your R2D2. Also probably utility and secret mission, even though secret mission isn't nearly as good as it used to be. I could also see bounty being considered utility because it is an extra victory point. It's not as strong objectively as it used to be, but hey, if you and your opponent are both at 11, that 12th victory point matters, you know? Or if you're both on round three with four apiece, that fifth victory point can matter. So, Exemplar is also absolute utility and probably the most iconic version that people see of it. Um, Clone Troopers are utility. Clone Trooper keyword, that's just the way it is. Thank you, Gar. You're the best. I love you guys. Um, yeah. But a lot of your utility units aren't necessarily your flashy fun units, right? It's your Veers, your yeah, your
Layers.
ATRTs. It's Leia's. I I like I still like again it's list dependent. My repair droid Binoc fleet troopers. Those are some of my favorite utility units. They hug a vehicle, give it aims, and they just sit there on a point, back capping until they have to counterpunch something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you try to at least make one core unit, or at least maybe one unit if you don't have two commanders, a complete support unit?
Um, as with everything else in Legion, it's going to get the big fat it depends. Um, it it really depends, right? You're I think if you make one unit like your dedicated support unit, there's a world where if they can't focus down the unit it's supporting, that's going to get targeted, and that'll be the chink in your defense. But if you spread your support and utility out amongst different units in different ways, then you start to build this interweaving mesh of support and utility that's hard to pull apart. So my Rebel ATRTs are the utility they provide is potentially backline capping, and long range DPS and line of sight blocking. Um, they are line of sight blocking for rebels and fleets with repair droids and binocs that are utilities supporting the ATRTs, and you get this web of cohesion and synergy that works together. It's hard to pull apart. I think you're more like quote unquote dedicated utility are probably going to come in your operative and commander slots because everything else tends to have a gun or a really big punch. So building out a unit for dedicated utility that's not an R2D2, that's not a Yoda. Let's face it, Yoda's like probably quintessential utility. Building out a core unit for utility is you're doing that, but it needs to also fill another role at the same time. Fleets, counterpunch, rebel troopers, range DPS. What else do we have? Clone troopers, they're just utility. That's the way it is. B1 droids, they take repair bots. They are utility. Right.
Boil and RPS. There you go.
Oh, Boil and RPS. Quintessential utility. I'm going to sit here. I'm going to shoot your thing with an impact rocket, and I'm going to generate tokens, and I'm going to guardian. Yeah, absolutely. Right? Its utility is you
And I have
don't build a
scout.
list. Yeah, and I have scout because Boyle is. I'm surprised Boyle did not get a points bump.
I'm
I.
surprised the Ewok upgrade didn't get one either.
It's like the stuff that got overshadowed by arcs didn't get a points bump.
Yeah. What do you know?
Can't be mad at that.
No, no, I can't. It's you don't build a list around counterpunch. You don't build a list around utility. You probably don't build a list around a tank. It's a bit more on the fence. Like you don't build a list around these, but you still want them in your list because they help round out the entire cohesiveness of it. And
Yeah,
again,
no, but
it could be a dedicated unit or it could be spread out amongst multiple units.
yeah, I would assume that probably emplacement troopers probably go well with that utility backline objective
They
holders.
absolutely can. They absolutely can. It kind of depends on how you're doing it, I think. Um, like not all things are equal. If so let's take the eWeb and the FD, right? Kind of your quintessential emplacements. They start on the board. They have a long range of fire. They back cap so that you can sit them in that utility because they are freeing up the rest of your army to go do stuff. There's an argument that FD cannons can't back cap everything, take better objectives in your list building. Um, that's how that is. There are some they can. Um, yeah, no, they are utility, but you have to be maybe a little flexible in your definition of utility. I definitely think they fit in that disruption. They don't line of sight block. I don't think they do. Emplacement line. I don't think line of sight. I don't think emplacement troopers line of sight block.
Didn't they used to provide cover?
Um,
Yes.
they used to.
Along with creature troopers.
Yeah.
Yes. So what
Back
happened
in
to
the
that?
before time. Well, well.
The wheels were
Um,
abused by Tauntauns, probably.
yes. Somebody in charge of making the rules was bad touched by a ton. And that preceded the long running history of nerfing tauns either directly or indirectly.
Poor Tauntauns. They didn't do anything to anybody. And then they proceed to get sliced open.
Who knows? Maybe we get new Tauntaun-oriented command cards in the future. Looking at you, Han and Luke.
I mean, yes, please. I think they said that we were getting Han and Luke on a ton
Hmm.
purely because they were redoing the ton sculpts, and it made sense to do that at the same time.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, that's cool.
So I
So that
wonder if
was like we got the art for Grievous on a wheel bike, and then there was the mention of, oh hey, so while we're doing all the soft plastic sculpts, Hans are getting resculpted, and oh by the way, now that we've announced commanders on vehicles with Grievous, we don't have a. Maybe they did give us a concept art. I don't remember, but they said because they were redoing the Ton sculpts, it made sense. You had to do Han and Luke at the same time because they were already working on it.
I wonder if it'll wind up being the same as I think this is in Lord of the Rings. Sorry. But if you bring someone who's mounted, don't you have to bring a non-mounted version? I wonder if something will be similar to that, like instead of
So I haven't played Lord of the Rings, but if that is the case, I don't know that I want Tauntaun Luke speed threeing across my battlefield and getting slapped into an op Luke. Like that's not a transformation I'm okay with.
So the way it works in Lord of the Rings is you do have to do that, but you also roll to see if they take wounds from getting launched off their mount and how they land. So potentially they could land essentially prone, so they're more vulnerable to, or they take more attack dice coming into them. So I could also see just Legion if we do have to do that, where it's just they come in injured and they have like a certain amount of, like they're half wounded or something like that.
Yeah. We're I don't know, a half wounded, depending on if you round up or down, a half wounded Luke is still potentially 4 HP.
Uh, I mean, if it's going to be a Tauntaun Luke, it'd have to be Commander Luke, probably.
Yeah, I could see that. I I think we're getting into been into homebrewy territory without being the designers themselves. Um, I will be int- I could see an argument one for doing it that way for the cool factor. I can also see an argument for the simplicity factor of, nah, this is the unit, and when the unit dies, the unit dies.
yeah, I mean that would be
So
much easier.
yeah, it really would. Again, less cool, but I don't need the fight music. I don't need the fight music during the boss fight to change in round three of the game when I'm on stream at Worlds already losing. Like the
All of the foot models have to be painted red because they're changing.
right, the LEDs start going off. Oh man, that's terrible.
That would
So,
actually be
but
pretty
no,
fun.
that's a general overview of the Pentagon of Power, as our good 40K friend Tactical Tortoise says. Um, again, it's not like this isn't telling you you can't skew heavy into one side or another. This is just saying, hey, when you're building a list, take a look at these categories and make sure that you're at least checking off each box as you go. You don't have to dedicate a whole lot to each category, but I have found consistently without fail that as long as I bring something, and like if I only bring a little bit of range DPS, like 2, maybe 3 units, yeah, I'm not going to slam them out on the front where they're going to get shredded, but I can still use them tactically to help shape the battlefield and punish poor positioning because it's just going to feel bad if I can't force my opponent to have to actually play the game on their half of the table. If I don't bring a tank, right? Like, am I unable to play the game? No. But I'm also going to be hurting if I don't have a unit that I can plop on a point and just absorb a lot of punishment and force my opponent to have to deal with it.
Then, do you think that we would want to go over any of the underrated, underused units now, or do you think that it would be better to kind of push that into another video?
I mean, that's up to you, lads. I think we've been over a few of them. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
there's like if there's anything we want to hammer out specifically, or if there's like a list that anybody has on the top of their head. I know some of my call outs of like fleets. Yeah, I know we laugh about it, but I'm telling you, next time you take 3 naked rebel core, just flip out a rebel for a fleet, see what happens.
Those fleets
Um,
touched me the
the
other day. I didn't like it.
um ATR or yeah, rebel ATRT is a lot better now. I think they're seeing more play, but there's been some grumbling about the T-47. I'm like, I don't know, guys. I think it's good. It fills a lot of roles in your list, and maybe it's not the T-47 of old, but I think it still has a place.
I just think we aren't seeing as many Cad Banes. We aren't seeing very many, Iden Versios. I don't think we're not. I haven't seen Moff Gideon in a while and Dark Troopers in a while, just because I think of the Armor 3 and, the fact that they don't get cover or anything.
Well,
Eh,
let's talk about this a little bit, right? So we'll start with Cad Bane. First off, I think the problem with a lot of these units is one, they in the case of like Dark Troopers, they are different from what they were before. The difference between full armor and armor 3 is a lot. Um, and then Cad Bane, he's the game is different now than it was, right? Cover's different, objectives are different. It's just a different world. But I think part of the problem people are having is they are thinking about these units and comparing them to the original version of themselves in the Legion Legacy. Cad Bane. I let's see. Cad Bane sits for me. I would put him in absolutely in the counterpunch realm. He's not a melee counterpunch, but he also does disruption. You can Electro Gauntlet and then zip around between units if you combine him with Whip Magnas or Whip Pikes. Like he's actually hard to tie down because he can just bounce between units with immobilize. Um, Counterpunch, he can tie up things that are trying to get into your line. Like if an Op Luke or somebody dives into you, or an Anakin dive. Like if Anakin dives into your line and doesn't kill the Cad Bane counter dives Anakin. Reasonably likely you get 2 immobilized tokens on Anakin, and you've essentially neutered that threat for as long as you can keep him tied down. And Anakin's lightsaber hurts a lot more. Like, or it doesn't hurt as bad, I should say, like the other way around. Anakin's lightsaber doesn't hurt nearly as bad when you're just getting free dodges to counter those hits. Like, sure, you're going to get pierced for a bunch, but you don't have to stop Anakin for the whole game, just enough of the game. Um,
Okay.
it's also disruption. Like, there's back to mental bandwidth. When you put all 3 of Cad Bane's tokens onto the battlefield, like last I checked, standing on Kablamo still hurts, and is a thing you kind of actively try to avoid, even if you don't know you are. You either intentionally run into it, or you're like, man, I don't know. That's I've got an expensive unit here. I don't want to take free wounds on.
Yeah, and then Jin, man, whatever's going on here. You have like Jin, who's not really being used anymore, and I feel
Yeah.
like
Well,
Lando's still not doing so hot.
poor Jin. I poor Jin.
Catching strays.
The prior to the last update, I would have absolutely been like, man, Jin is absolutely being underused. I think there's still something here. However, now that because she is charged, doesn't she, with her
With the 1 pip.
yeah. It's like now that charge has changed, it's like what does she do? I mean, don't get me wrong. I actually think Jin is sits kind of awkwardly, or maybe less awkwardly in the tank slot. Like if you don't one or two shot Jin, she's actually hard to kill. Like probably outside of Han, one of the hardest units in the game to kill if you're just plinking into her. And with the lack of like old school fire support now and fully reinforced squads not really being a thing outside of B2s, I think Jin has the potential to sit on a point and just not move.
What do you think could make her better? Like if she were a commander and kept quick thinking with Exemplar, I feel like that would make it better. And
Well, let me pull up her unit card.
Infiltrate seems like it would still be pretty great. Danger Sense 4 would be good. Nimble. I just think if she maybe. Well, I guess she wouldn't even need Exemplar because that's not really her character, I guess. I mean,
It's
maybe.
I mean, she has that speech, so you could argue for it, I guess.
Yeah.
Gets a whole bunch of
you
people to
know
go and die, essentially.
Yeah.
So,
Leads everyone to their deaths
yeah.
heroically.
so I think sometimes maybe not purely mechanically, but I like to look at things in terms of flavor, right? She's got inspire. She gives another unit teamwork on her 2 pip. 3 pip gives her low profile, does a bunch of actually her 3 pip when for or activation can't become pain. Her 3 pip might be sneaky good. If we see the rise of suppression lists like I'm starting to get hints at coming from the wild, her 3 pip might be sneaky good at just ensuring late game scoring when everything is suppressed.
I mean, if you want a underutilized suppression unit, IG-11. I
Oh,
I don't know why
absolutely.
he's not getting used more with all the operatives right now.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that would be
let me
pretty
get back
good.
to IG.
But I think
I
that.
think
No, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I think it would be interesting to give Jin guidance operative. She's got that flavor where she's working with the rebel cells, right? She does the teamwork thing. She does the 3 pip where we're like, we're gonna do the mission thing. I think guidance operative, because we've seen guidance ground vehicle now with Veers and guidance trooper with Yoda. I think guidance like operative really digging into that rebel identity and that Rogue One identity could be an interesting and potentially powerful thing for her to do.
I mean, if anything, at least maybe guidance a special forces unit
I could also see
as
special
well.
forces. Yeah,
I
I
think the
could see
operative
that.
makes the most sense though, because she was mostly talking to the main characters. But I don't
Yeah,
think that her 3 pip is the best because I mean you can just put on a captain like a a stormtrooper captain or a rebel captain, and they just will almost do the same thing with their specific thing. Let's see, what was it? Rebel technician. No. What was
Well,
it? Hold on.
those increase the courage value by 1, and then they give the unit inspire, so they pull in suppression off of other units.
No, the
So
the
the
rebel
thing with
trooper, like the captain says, when you activate, you cannot remove suppression or be suppressed during this activation. So I mean, that's
well,
kind of like her 3-pip, and you can just kind of do that to whoever you give the order to. So,
so it's similar, but her 3-pip also says it can't be panicked,
well, yeah,
and
there's
it
that.
it it doesn't have the text that says you can't remove suppression. So you can the unit that you order with her, you can recover to pull all of their suppression off if they've been suppression bombed.
Yeah, because they can just recover, I'm assuming, and then.
Yeah, because you can't do that with the captain. The captain specifies you can't pull the suppression off.
Mhm.
So I think the captain is definitely like, if you're not taking Jin, captains are a way to get around being suppressed. But Jin might see some light as like a counter panic pick if suppression bomb lists start taking light. I think action denial is something a lot of people are sleeping on. Like
And
your
score
units
denial.
only get 10 actions a game. Hmm?
And score denial.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but we were talking. We were talking about IG for a moment.
Yeah.
IG 11, right?
Uh huh. That suppressive gunslinger. it's
Oh, it turns out it's real good.
yep.
I I'm doing a version of this using a saber tank with the beam cannon and the ISP, but just doing it on one unit for the whole game turns out it's good.
I mean, I don't know. You put a flamer snow in the back of a Gav. That's also suppressive. And you have
Well,
evens. They suppressive too. So now they can't even move up to your points.
yeah,
I know
that's
everyone's
a lot
focused
of
on
suppression.
Krennic and Vader bombs, but steady suppression buildup ain't bad either.
Oh no, I'm really starting to look at like how to ramp suppression from round 1 that's not just like a one-off bomb. And it's a case so and I think part of why people maybe gravitate towards the Vader or the Krennic is because it's like, man, I'm putting a bunch of suppression on a whole bunch of things. And what I found is you don't need to put suppression on everything. You just have to put a bunch of suppression on the right things.
Yep.
So, um,
Yeah, I'm
absolutely,
assuming
IG is another one,
everything around
and I
it
think IG
a
fits well into
POI.
range GPS. I'm sorry. Go ahead. What's up?
No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I think IG also fits well into like that range DPS category where he's not putting out like massive die pools, but he's putting out consistent damage because your your range DPS is I think is going to fall into 2 phases. Phase 1, round 1 of the game, maybe round 2, you're doing like the shaping of the battlefield where you're punishing your opponent for not maneuvering correctly, not following terrain correctly, and you're not allowing them to just have total dominance of their half of the board. Then you get into the second half of the game, or I guess the second 2/3, where your range DPS falls more into the attrition line of work, where you're doing the weakening your opponent's units, finishing off weak units, and I think the IG fits very well into there.
Yeah. I mean, he fits well into the idea of disruption if you're doing that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I guess you could probably put um, a counterpunch too, because they're both impervious and have
Yeah.
at least four red dice in melee.
No, absolutely. And again, this goes back to the idea of like you may not have a unit that fits cleanly into one category, but they dip toes into a bunch of categories, just like IG here. And so they're an excellent toolbox or flex piece to be able to tag multiple different things depending on where you need them in a fight.
Yeah, I think that covers quite a bit of kind of like a few units that we haven't quite seen on the table. Maybe some things that hopefully put them on the table. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll give you a
Oh,
separatist one, since it sounds like we're wrapping up. I don't know why we're
good.
not
But yeah.
seeing more suicide spiders.
Okay.
I don't understand. Just throw them in with a flamer, they run in, they take damage, they blow up on everything that's trying to contest a point.
I think a flamer jammer spider might be one of the most hilarious things I've ever seen. Um, building their armor 3, surging white saves, what, 6 health with their explode happening when they have 2 remaining, I think.
Yeah,
Am I wrong?
yeah. When they
Okay.
break, they can self-destruct.
Well, I think building around self-destruct isn't going to get you very far because actually pulling off a self-destruct, like being able to look at a spider and go, "You're going to self-destruct," is hard to do if you don't have order control and priority and somehow manage to make sure it has 2 wounds at the end of the round, right? So from the other side of the table, if I see a spider that has 3 wounds left, so it's not going to blow up yet, and we're getting towards the end of the round, I'm not going to shoot that spider because the last thing I want to happen is direct AI off of a 1 pip, and I just go, well, snap, it's going to explode now. I'm going to wait until next round where I can finish it off in an inopportune time where it doesn't get shot. That being said, I think 100% in terms of the aggro disruption, a flamer spider, and I would actually probably do hacked comps here instead of comps jammer. A flamer spider with hacked comps that I run into my opponent's list that just flames stuff and is absolutely annoying. And is, I think, taller than a trooper silhouette, is it not?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
So
especially if you
that's
build it with the taller legs.
so that's hilarious because then you can go stand in front of your opponent's trooper unit leaders and then they have to move to shoot instead of aim shooting. Um,
Bring in some magnets behind them. Why
right.
not?
So, and then what happens is they either don't kill the spider and the spider is going to be flaming their stuff with order control, which just feels terrible, or they do kill the spider and you either have to like play the dice game and hope you don't leave it on 2 at the end of the round, or you get it to 2 and then go, oh snap, I have to kill this thing before it explodes. And then you pour everything into it. And as a spider player, that's what I want because now they're not shooting my other stuff. Like,
I mean, it would
yeah.
also be interesting putting like defensive protocols on them, so you can try to play around the. Oh no, I'm not spending the dodge.
Oh, that's hilarious. I forgot they took proto. See, I don't see spiders enough.
Yeah.
Defensive protocol flaming spiders. This has got to be one of the most hilarious things I've heard in a while. I need to see this in my life. Like, please, somebody, just just run 3 of them in.
I feel like CAS has a lot of good tricks that they can actually do to their vehicles.
So I started this line of thinking back with BX droids back in Legacy Legion. Um, CIS, from my point of view, has an insane number of incredibly good units. The problem the faction has is they're being overshadowed by a small number of hyper efficient units looking at you, Magna Guard. Like, yeah, spiders are so cheeky in like a really good way. I think BX commando droids, even before Invasion Force, were really good. But why would you take BX commandos when you could take Magna Guard? Like, there's a lot of things they have that are just so good, but it's like they're just overshadowed by more efficient things they have.
Yeah.
That being said, with new cover, I'm surprised we haven't seen more AATs out there, because 4 red high velocity crit whatever with barrage is probably really good.
Oh, it is. It's again, it's one of those overshadow things. People are
Yeah,
using the snails.
yeah,
Mhm.
and that's 100% what it is, right? I think CIS probably has one of the best rosters in the game if we're not looking at the units that are just hyper efficient and yeah, overshadowing everything else.
Did they change the rule on ordnance now? With
Ordnance.
because I was just wondering because I was just like people always when they gave the AAT a second ordnance slot, you could initially put 2 high energy shells, or at least the
Um,
list builder's not letting me know. So I was just wondering, like, did they change that?
no, the list builder might be bugging out. You can only take one of an upgrade on a unit.
Oh, okay, so then yeah, it's fine then. All right.
Yeah,
That's what I thought, but yeah, now it doesn't even have to move. It doesn't want to. It can double up on shells and
like
just rotate back and forth.
well, the AAT is the quintessential tank, right? I don't even know that you double up on shells. If you're sitting on a point not moving, why shoot the main gun and the AT shell when you can shoot the main gun twice and double up on your suppression, or take lock dirt and quad up on your suppression? Like I would instead of AT shells, I would probably take bunker busters and AP shells so that I have some utility and disruption or some dedicated anti tank.
Honestly, you probably don't even need the AP shells. High energy is probably fine because the base gun now is crit 2, impact 2. So if you're doing it twice into
Wait,
a tank, it's impact 4, crit 4.
did they up the impact on
Yep,
it? It used to be crit 2 impact 1.
yep. And now it's also surge and hit, so.
I I
Yeah,
tend to agree with you. I don't even think you take the AP shells anymore now.
yeah.
Okay. The one argument, the one argument I see for the AP shell is for that I need to move and shoot. However,
Fair enough. Yeah.
however, range for high velocity, good. Figure it out, stop moving.
Yeah. Because I honestly I could see that coming more into play now with the rise of sleeper cell, because that dodge from being at range 1 of an objective is obnoxious.
Yeah. Oh, and can we take a moment to recognize that the AAT got another buff in that they have Exemplar now? Like they have access to Exemplar? It turns out, now I wasn't aware of this as a clone player, but it turns out if you can just steal green tokens from other units, you're probably doing good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that exemplar really does help the vehicles a lot.
That was losing Exemplar in Republic is probably what like made me the saddest, because I looked at all my fun armor lists and I was like, well, I guess clone token sharing is gonna have to be good enough for you vehicles. Um, joke, but yeah,
Yeah, it's. I think that's my issue right now with Gar is just it's so hyper focused on the idea of clones being elite that it's hard to do anything that isn't that.
I've I've always felt a bit of reverence and respect for anybody that had to design around clones or Republic as a whole, because like that entire faction makes it so whenever you release a unit, it's either an incredibly broken unit that's gonna up in the whole game, or it's dead on arrival. like trying to make something for our public historically is just, I would not want to be in that position. It sounds like a nightmare to try to balance it along that razor edge.
Yeah, especially when they add more along the same lines to the units too.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
But yeah,
kind of to tie this up a little bit, I think maybe. Krabok, I love you, buddy. Rule of two, I don't think you're wrong, but I don't think it's everything.
Yeah, I think things are still good in threes. I feel like that is always
Yeah.
the holy trinity there. I
Hey,
think the three.
3 arc makes people sad.
Mm-hmm. And now that you can take four, it's even better.
Oh, now you just don't want to have friends.
That yes. But I think this was a great discussion. I like the Pentagon of power here, and kind of like the final wrap up of maybe a few units that are fun to talk about. I think that the second half could be a whole nother video in itself, and or at least
Oh,
even
absolutely.
expanding on some of the topics of CIS and stuff. And hopefully,
Listen,
yeah, go ahead.
honestly, I am happy to do a whole nother video with you guys if you'd like, where you give me units that are bad. I tell you why they're not bad, and then the internet tells us why I'm crazy.
If I can find a way to do a live Q&A video using the Discord, I'm going to do it because I know that in the bigger Discord they've got something like that. I just need to probably watch a YouTube video on how to integrate that or how to get that done, so that way we can kind of film, do a live Q&A with everybody, set it up, and then have you on here, maybe a few different guys on here, and just either answer questions or kind of start a little just talk session or something.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, I'll have to wind up wrapping it up here. But this was a great talk. We'll have to get it in again soon because I think a lot of people, again, like y'all were saying, are hyper focused on a few different pieces in the different factions. And I think AMG is trying to do their best by limiting the units by making them more expensive so that other things can kind of see the light of day. But I guess it just depends on maybe the new units coming out with the ARF troopers, the Aqua droids. I think we're going to just still see a whole bunch of new stuff coming out list wise. So that'll be great for us. And so if you've got any closing statements or any kind of things like that, we'll go ahead and go around. But I don't think I've got too much to say. I think this was a really good discussion on kind of making sure you fill out the 5 different aspects of this in a list.
can't wait to see where Aquadroids land on that chart.
I'm fairly confident because I think they said they're a vehicle. I'm gonna first and foremost slap them straight in the utility slot, and that
Or
may be a
tank.
discussion for another day. I haven't seen the unit card yet, so maybe tank. But with how tall they are, okay, I'll end on this: 4 models taller than a trooper base, taller than trooper silhouette, that are vehicles in a single unit. You can line them up because you move, unless something changes, you move the unit leader, then you cohere, right? You cohere them in a line. You now have a line of sight blocking wall that you can fit an entire army of nasty behind. If that's not utility, I don't know what is.
But they would have to be
I
considered
really hope they're not
vehicles.
vehicles.
I'm pretty sure they said they were vehicles.
Oh, good lord. We're going to see
It was
CIS
a good
coming out
day.
on top now.
Yeah, like I said, the utility slot making a comeback hard.
It was such a good day.
All right, everybody. I think that's enough of the craziness that is Pally for the internet for one day.
No, it's good. I like it. But All right, guys. Well, then that is it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and we will see you in the next one. Peace out.
Later.
Doodles.